Hi, welcome back. During the next hour or two, we'll learn about the characteristics of protein. This is very introductory before we start with the protein digestion next week, right? And even before that, I'll start with the Nutrition 101 to give you some reminders before we move to protein, right? All right, let's open my slide. Okay, here it always takes a few seconds. Here, okay. Then I will share the screen. All right. Hey, now you should be able to watch this white background saying overview. Okay, so that's what we are going to talk about. Starting with just some chats to about nutrients. Nutrients, remember when you're undergraduate students, maybe in an introductory nutrition course or animal nutrition course, you may remember there was a basic classification of nutrients. What kind of nutrient do we have? What are we talking about? Um, Typically, classically, we say there are 6 different nutrients. Right? What are they? What kind of nutrient is making animal body? As an example, you may say protein for sure, because you're taking this course. Protein, that's right. Animal body, you can think about fat or lipids, fats or lipids. Okay, let's say lipids. So you already mentioned 2, protein and lipids. However, you should not forget about these nutrients. They're taking the largest portion of animal body. What is that? Okay, I know many of you already answered that. It's water. So water takes the largest part of the body and the animal body as an example. And then after that, it will be about equally protein and lipids. Sometimes higher protein, sometimes higher lipids than the other, right? And then if you think about animal body, there will be, what do you see? What else do you see? You see the bone, right? Bone is constituted of protein, but mainly the calcium and phosphorus. So it's mineral. It's mineral. It's another types of nutrient you can see in the animal body. So we talked about water, protein, lipids, minerals, right? What else? It's not much at all in animal body, but there's a carbohydrate. You can find lots of carbohydrates in the plant body, plant tissue. Plant tissue, the majority after water is carbohydrates, either as a form of starch or fiber, right? So we count uh, carbohydrates here as well. And then we don't want to forget about this called vitamins. Vitamins, that's another the types of nutrients that you can find in animal body or plant tissue, helping the metabolism of other nutrients. So this is what we have. Water, we talked about it, protein and lipids, and talked about carbohydrates, mainly for plants. And we have minerals making bone of the animal body and the vitamins. So these are the 6 nutrients that we talk about. What are their functions? There will be 100 very specific functions of all each types of nutrients. But in general, if I just really generalized the general function of nutrients, what is that? Number one, making tissue, making the animal tissue, making plant tissue. Okay? Another function is we eat the food, okay? We obtain the nutrients, and we get energy from from the metabolism of those nutrients, we get the energy. So energy generation. Okay? So here we obtain the energy from the nutrients, okay? And we can grow or produce something or tissue or some product from using the nutrients. Okay, these are the two main, very big functions of the nutrients. Okay. Among the 6 different types of nutrients, mainly protein, lipids, and carbohydrates, those are the 3 main nutrients that can be used to generate energy. In the case of mineral, or in the case of vitamin or water, they will not generate energy directly when they are broken down. Okay? So these are the carbohydrates and lipids and protein that can provide energy when they are metabolized. Okay? And among the 6 nutrients, protein, lipids will be a good part of the tissue, making tissue. The mineral, in the case of mineral, of course, it will be part of animal body. So mineral are used for the growth and maintenance, and even water. But in the case of carbohydrates, and if we are talking about animal body, we don't see the carbohydrate becomes the main part of the body tissue. Right? In the case of plants, that we are not talking about plant here. In the case of plant, carbohydrate can be the major part of the tissue. Right? The vitamin would not be, will not be a part of body tissue, even though it can be arguable that fat-soluble vitamin, lipids vitamin, it can be stored in the lipids, so it can be a part of animal body. But if we just talk in general, the vitamins will not be used for the growth of tissues, will not be a part of the growing tissue. And the third function, general function of nutrients, we should not ignore, those nutrients will control the body processes. And we're talking about enzyme. Enzyme is needed for any reactions in the body. We're talking about hormones. Hormones control the processes. What are they made of? Enzymes. It's made of protein. Hormones. It's made of protein or lipids. Okay? So that's a function of the nutrients. However, in the case of carbohydrates, it's very rarely you see that carbohydrates directly regulate and control the body processes. There are exceptions. Okay? The carbohydrate can be a part of compound called glycoprotein. They can have a function in controlling the body processes or signaling and so on. So I'll put the question mark here when I say except for carbohydrate here. Okay? But these are the general functions of nutrients. So this slide will be quick. If we talk about animal body compared to plant body, the animal body, the main components will be water, proteins, lipids, and mineral and carbohydrate. Carbohydrate will be very small, okay? Sometimes very minor. The vitamins will not be a part of body structure. I already mentioned the fat-soluble vitamins can be stored as part of fat. Okay, so I put the question mark here too. If we talk about the composition of nutrients in the food and feed that animals ingest, right? What are those nutrients? We talk about the animal-derived food and feeds like meats, okay, same as our own body, water, carbohydrates, protein, lipids, and minerals and vitamin, but I highlighted protein and also I will highlight lipids too. A protein will be the main, and with the depending on the source, there could be significant amount of lipids. However, the carbohydrate will be very minimum. You cannot get carbohydrates, any enough carbohydrate from the meats, right? If we talk about the plant-derived, the food and feeds like cereal grains or the legume seed like soybeans and so on, they have a high content of carbohydrates. It can be either starch or fiber, but plant tissue is high in carbohydrates. And depending on the source, it could have a very small amount of protein or significant amount of protein. If it is a cereal grains, very low, less than 10%. If it is soybean, it's high, it's higher than 30%. Depending on also grain, there are some lipids there as well, usually 5%, less than 10%, right? So that's the comparison between the animal tissue, the food from animal, or food from plant. They are different. Right? Okay, now let's move to our own topic, the protein. So protein is always there whenever we eat. Okay, the food we have, the feed we are feeding to animal, there will be protein, right? Most likely, and so we'll talk about that. Okay, this is more like a structure. Okay, what is the basic components of proteins? That's the question to you. What is proteins made of? What is the answer? Okay, I know all of you, most of you won't know. Okay, it is amino acids. The proteins uh, is sequence of amino acids. So it's made of amino acids. I say multiple amino acids. It's plural. That means there's there are many different types of amino acids. Actually, there are 20 amino acids making a body protein. Okay, so answer is amino acids. Basically, the connection of amino acids that are connected to each other. So it's a sequence of amino acid that is processed to make protein. So when you talk about the characteristics of protein, the characteristics will be largely influenced by the types of amino acids making that protein. So depending on the composition of amino acids, that will determine the characteristics of that particular protein. There are so many types of proteins you can talk about, and they are all different. Okay? So the characteristics of protein is determined by the sequence of amino acid and the composition of amino acids. So if I summarized here, the quantity of amino acid will determine the characteristics or quality of protein. And the quality of amino acid, that means the composition, the relative, the pattern, I should say pattern among 20 amino acids. right? That will also determine the characteristics of protein. And maybe typically we don't worry about this too much, but still the degree of racemization, we are talking about L-type amino acid versus D-type amino acid, or L-form or D-form amino acids that will affect the characteristics of protein, right? We'll talk about it. And this is important. We should not forget that the solubility of protein, because some protein is hardly soluble, so insoluble. Some are highly soluble, so soluble. So depending on what kind of amino acids are existing outside of the structure, that is one of key determinant for the solubility of protein. So depending on the amino acid composition and their location, the protein solubility will be influenced. So let's talk about each of them. Right. First, the quantity of amino acid depending on the source of protein, right? So we are talking about the percent of amino acid in the feed or foodstuff or feedstuff. Depending on source, amino acid contents are largely different. Simple comparison here between meat and corn, or pork versus corn. Can imagine, I think can imagine, we don't need an exact number here. Which one will have a higher amino acid content? It's an easy answer, the meat. Most likely the meat will have a higher amino acid content compared to corn. Animal tissue versus plant tissue. We will talk more about this later, but here I am introducing this concept, essential amino acid, EAA, essential amino acid. This is also called indispensable amino acid, indispensable amino acid. That means these are the amino acids that animal cell cannot make by itself. So we have to eat, we have to obtain it from the food sources. They're essential. So essential amino acid is very important. How much essential amino acids are included in the food that determines the quality of protein. So we are comparing three sources of protein from the plant. Okay? First is soybean meal. Second is peanut meal. Third is cottonseed meal. These are meal. So I would say these are the feed stuff. Those are the ingredient fed to the animals. Of course, human food could have this too, but more likely these are the animal feed stuff. Okay? Soybean meal, if you haven't heard about this, it's okay. Soybean meal is the solid parts. No, I'll explain this way. Once you obtain soybeans, okay, why we grow soybeans? One of the main reasons is to obtain oil from soybean. So soy oil is one of the main objective to grow soybeans. I mean, U.S. is one of the major soybean producers in the world, together with Brazil, right? Number one or number two. We grow soybean to extract oil from soybean. So once you extract oil from soybean, the leftover is usually roasted and cooked and dried. And that is meal. So we call that soybean meal. So soybean meal is soybean without oil. so it's a high in protein. Peanut meal, very similar concept. Once you have a peanuts, you remove the oil from that. So peanut butter, you obtain peanut butter. Leftover is peanut meal. Same thing for the cottonseed meal. Once you obtain oil from cottonseed, we call it cottonseed oil. The leftover when it's dried and cooked, it's called cooked and dried. It's called cottonseed meal. All these are commonly used feed stuff, feed ingredient to the animals. However, depending on the source, you can see the content of essential amino acid, the important amino acid are greatly different. Soybean meal has very high essential amino acid content compared to the others, peanut meal and cottonseed meal. So depending on the source, the quality of protein will be very different. Now we are talking about very specific amino acid called lysine. Lysine is a good example telling people the quality of protein because most of food or feed doesn't have enough lysine that is needed by animals and human. Right? So we have to eat more protein source to get enough lysine. As an example, lysine content is not always sufficient. So when we determine the quality of feed stuff, we check the lysine content. Okay, so that's why I'm showing lysine content, comparing cereal grains, oats versus corn. Those are source. They provide a good amount of starch. Right? It has a low protein, but if you look at the specific content of lysine within that protein, so this lysine content in the whole oats and whole corn, oats has a lot higher lysine compared to the corn. So in terms of lysine content, oat is better than corn, right? But in terms of starch content, it's opposite. Corn is higher and in starch compared to oats. So it's all different depending on what you're looking at. So here I showed you the quantity of amino acid will determine the characteristics of protein. Okay? One of the way to check the characteristics of protein. Second thing we will look at is the quality of amino acid. That is, in other words, amino acid patterns, the composition of amino acid making the protein. So we call it quality of amino acid. Right here, I am comparing corn versus soybean meal. So SBM is an acronym of soybean meal. We talked about soybean meal in the previous slide. The case of corn, if you look at the amino acid composition, not the amount, but the composition, the percentage. Right? Corn has high sulfur containing amino acids in its protein compared to soybean meal. As an example, here I should explain what sulfur containing amino acid is shown in SAA, sulfur containing amino acid. Those are two amino acids called methionine and cysteine. Two of them, very unique amino acid. It contains sulfur in the structure. So we call them sulfur containing amino acid or SAA. SAA content is high in corn protein, low in soybean meal protein. However, lysine, very important amino acid, lysine is low in corn protein, but very high in soybean meal protein. Same for tryptophan. So depending on the source of protein, even though both of them are plant source, the qualities can be very different. In fact, by looking at the differences among amino acid composition, high SSA, SAA in corn, high lysine and tryptophan in soybean meal. If you combine corn and soybean meal, amino acid composition will be very ideal for animal. Right? So animals, if we use corn and soybean meal mixed together, it provides very good amino acid composition for the effective growth of the animal. So it gives two of them gives complementary effects because each of them is a high or low, and it can complement each other. In animal feeding, in animal feed production, feed use, you can see that corn and soybean meals are often the two major components in animal feeds. Why? Because of that reason, complementary effects. In the case of human, we have a very good example, very similar example. It's a corn with the milk. The corn is high in sulfur-containing amino acid, low in lysine, but the milk is opposite. So if you eat corn flakes with milk, it gives very good amino acid composition to human because corn and milk has a complementary effect in terms of improving the quality of amino acids, right? So that's about second item, determining the characteristics of protein. We'll spend time specifically looking at, more specifically, protein in corn as an example. So you are watching a cross-section of a kernel of corn. Here, you see the pericarp. Pericarp is the cover. And here in the core, the main inside is called the germ. Germ is surrounded by the large area of endosperm. The endosperm takes the largest space, portion of a kernel of corn. Same for the most of other cereal grains. Right? Depending on the components making a kernel of corn, you can see the different nutrient composition. If you look at the endosperm, okay, it takes largest portion of the kernel of corn. So 80% and over more of the corn is endosperm. It's mainly filled with the starch. Starch is the main part of the endosperm. So 80% of a corn, 70% of endosperm is starch. That means the majority of corn is starch. Only less than 10% of endosperm is protein, so very small contribution. But if you look at the germ, which is only 10% of the corn, kernel of corn, quarter is starch, very low in starch, but relatively high in protein, very high in oil. Okay, so germ is a good source of oil. So when you extract oil from corn to obtain corn oil, the germ will be used to extract oil out of it because up to 30% of germ is oil. So depending on which part of corn we are looking at, there's a different types of protein. We'll talk about this protein and with different amount of protein contributed. Okay, pericarp the cover is about 5% of corn. Let's talk about the composition or quality of those proteins from endosperm or from germ. Right? Protein in corn. Let's talk about the protein in germ. Call it germ protein. Germ protein is a high quality, high feeding quality, either for animal, human, and avians, and mammals, avian. The protein from germ has high quality compared to the protein found in the endosperm. Okay, protein in the endosperm is grouped, and we call them glutenin and prolamine. Glutenin, prolamine. These are the types of proteins found in the endosperm of cereal grains, not only in the corn, but also in other cereal grains too. Right? In the case of corn, glutenin is called zeanin. So it has a very specific name. The corn glutenin is called zeanin. You look at the quality of the zeanin is intermediate compared to lower than germ protein, but higher than the other one called zein. When you say zein, it refers to the corn prolamin. Prolamin found in the endosperm of the corn is called zein. Has the low quality. So how do I say high quality, intermediate quality, and low quality? It depends on the amino acid composition, right? The feeding value, the value for the animals. And on unfortunately, okay, the zein is low quality, but it takes the largest portion of protein in the endosperm. Zeanin is the smaller than zein in terms of the amount. If you use a fertilizer to grow corn, okay, fertilization will increase the content of zein. So it will be more zein, more prolamine in corn, right? So that's related. That will be related to uh, quality of corn protein, right? Now move to the cereal grains because we just talked about specifically only for corn, but now move to the more general cereal grains. Now again, there's a germ, right? High in oil, high in protein, and the sperm high in starch, right? If you look at the protein, specifically protein in the endosperm, okay, we have prolamines and glutenin in the case of cereal grains. So if you look at the prolamines and glutenins, depending on cereal grains, they have all different names. Wow, there's so many kind of foreign language, right? I will not ask you to know all this name because you can read, right? You can come back to this slide to know. But don't forget about the corn. Corn prolamine is called zein. The corn glutenin is called zeanin. So why? This is so important food source and so important the feed ingredients. In the case of legume seeds like soybeans, okay, the proteins in endosperm is called mainly albumins and globulins, and we'll talk about in the next slide. Okay? Before that, if you talk a little more about the prolamine, is a major storage protein in cereal grains. Okay? It has several polypeptides stabilized by sulfur bond, disulfide bond between the two sulfurs. What does that mean? Which amino acid has sulfur in the structure? Earlier, we talked about SAA, sulfur-containing amino acid, methionine, and cysteine. So if this polypeptide chain, what do you know what that is, right? I mean, that's a sequence of amino acid, sequence of many amino acid. When there is one polypeptide and another polypeptide, and each of them contains methionine and or cysteine, which includes sulfur, they can be connected to each other, making disulfide bonds. So two polypeptide can be connected to make a structure that is very condensed structure. So water cannot get in. So it's a hydrophobic usually, right? So that means the solubility will be low. So prolamine has a poor digestibility. So protein should be soluble to water to be digested. So it's a poor digestibility. So the quality is low. It is very similar for the case of protein in the endosperm found in the soybean. And those proteins, the endosperm, in the case soybean, is called globulin. And specifically, it has a specific name, soy glycinin, soy beta conglacinin. Those are two main protein types of proteins making the globulin of soy beans. So globulin in the endosperm of soybeans. Okay? They are glycinin and beta conglacinin. Same thing. Several polypeptides are stabilized by disulfide bond. So insoluble. It's all relative term, relatively insoluble. So lower digestibility. Okay? That's what it says. Going back to prolamine. Prolamines are known to have a high content of proline and glutamine. Those are two non-essential amino acids, proline and glutamine. Proline, glutamine, proline, glutamine, prolamine, proline, glutamine. It sounds kind of similar, right? When you pronounce proline and glutamine, prolamine. Okay, I don't know if true or not. I have to really check, but the prolamine has a high in proline and glutamine. It is soluble in alcohol, acid, or alkaline, but not in neutral water. So solubility is low in water. One thing in the case specifically for the prolamine in the wheat, from the wheat, okay? It is shown that this wheat prolamine, I mean, not only wheat, but many wheat here, it is known to cause allergenic reaction. So they're known as an allergens when animals and human ingested. So it causes allergy reaction in the small intestine. Okay? It is very hard to disrupt, remove the prolamine, wheat prolamine called gluten. Right? It's strong against the heat, strong against low pH or high pH, or poorly digestible, resistant to digestive enzymes. So if in the case of human, something called celiac disease, that's like autoimmune disease happens in the small intestine. That is mainly caused by the allergenics, because of the allergenicity of the corn prolamine. Right? In the case of a pig, swine, pig, young pigs will have something similar to this, but it is not called celiac disease. It doesn't have a name, but the young pigs, their intestine is allergic to glycinin and beta conglacinin. So young pigs' intestine, small intestine of young pigs, they have a issue of handling the glycine and beta conglacinin. They are known allergens for young pigs. All right. We already talked about soybean protein when we talk about proteins in cereal grains. So can we go a little quick here? So proteins in soybeans, almost all proteins found in soybeans are storage proteins, which means majority will be gluten, globulin. Soybean globulin is called glycinin and beta conglacinin, which takes majority again. And between these two, glycinin is more than half, and less than half will be beta-glycine, right? So this means young animals will have a issue with handling the soy protein. The adult animal has no problem, but this is the case of young animals. Okay, now we move to continue to talk about quality of amino acids, but now this time we will compare the quality of amino acids. So quality of amino acid pattern among different cereal grains. Right? This applies to human and animals too. Depending on the amino acid pattern, the composition of amino acid, oats will have the highest value, right? Sorghum protein has the lowest value. Corn and rice are in the middle, right? In animal feeding, corn is used a lot, barley is used a lot, but they are used to mainly provide starch, not the protein. So cereal grains is mainly used for providing energy through the starch. Okay? But if you care about the protein from cereal grains, even though the amount is low, less than 10%, less than 12%, here you can think about the quality of those protein. Right? How is this determined? Depending on the relative amount of essential amino acid compared to those amino acids are not essential. We call them non-essential amino acid. Also, depending on the content of lysine, the most important lacking amino acid. Okay? So these are the factors determining the protein quality among different sources. Here, among all these 7 different cereal grains, commonly the first limiting, which means the most deficient amino acid from cereal grains is lysine. Right? So if you feed cereal grains to the animal, or if you are eating cereal grains as a main source of your food, you may need additional lysine from other food sources or as a supplement. Same for animals. The most animal feed, monogastric, swine, poultry, if you look at their feed, which is based on corn or cereal grains with some soybean meal, they still those feed will still have some supplemental additional lysine added, right? So because cereal grains are not providing enough lysine. Second most deficient is mostly threonine or tryptophan, okay, depending on the source. So we'll talk a lot about lysine, threonine, and tryptophan because those are very important amino acid in nutrition because food stuff and feed stuff in general is low in their contents. Okay, so we talked about 2 main things, and now we'll talk about the third item determining characteristics of protein. That is the degree of racemization, right? That is related to the structure of amino acid. If by looking at the location of amino group, right, in 3-dimensional way here, where is that located? Is that left side or right side or counterclockwise or clockwise? Depending on that, you can differentiate L amino acid or D amino acid. So in the case of a lysine can be either L-lysine or D-lysine. All amino acids will have that, except for glycine, which has a mirror image. Okay? Interesting thing is, the protein that you see from animal tissue and plant tissues, the amino acid making those proteins are all L amino acids. You don't see D amino acid in animal protein and plant protein. However, if you look at fungus or bacteria, if you look at their protein in the fungus and bacteria, they may contain D amino acid. As an example, phenylalanine, they will contain D-phenylalanine. This is phenylalanine. Always exception in biology. In the case of frog, animal, the frog, tree frog, South American tree frog. Look at their protein on the skin. It was shown that it contains D-tyrosine, contains a D-alanine. Right? So those are some exceptions. Here, please remember, the bacterial protein contains D-phenylalanine. Fungal protein contains D-phenylalanine. So bacteria, actually, they can convert D versus L. Going next slide. Continuing about the racemization. Since most proteins in plant and animal tissues are made of L-type amino acids, the food and feeds will provide L amino acid. But in the case of fermented food, fermentation, how do you ferment? It's fermentation by microorganisms, the bacteria, fungus, okay? There's a fermentation product can contain D form, D-type amino acids, because bacteria can convert it, okay? So the yogurts, protein in yogurts and protein in cheese could have a D amino acids. But I think this is important thing. If mammals, as an example, ingest D-type amino acids compared to L, they cannot be incorporated into body protein. So when protein is newly made, D amino acid will not be a part of that in translation process, which we'll learn later again. But those proteins in animal tissue most likely will be made of L amino acids. Always there are exceptions, because if you ingest D amino acids, it can go to the liver. The liver can convert it to L amino acid too. So it can be used in protein synthesis only after it is converted to L type. Okay? But if it's not converted to L type, it will be excreted in urine. So you can see that you can see D amino acid in urine, right? This is the summary from so many research papers showing the ability of the animals that can utilize D-type amino acids. That means when I say utilization of D amino acid, that is the ability of animals that can convert D amino acid into L amino acid in their liver. So related to functionality of the liver by animal species. I have a rat, I have a dog, I have a man, a pig, and chicken. In the case of lysine, D-lysine, there's no report, no research showing these animal species can utilize D-lysine So very poor conversion of D-lysine to L-lysine in the liver. This is interesting in the case of methionine. It's very interesting that animals, depending on species, rats, dogs, pigs, and chickens, except for human, their liver are shown to be effectively convert D-methionine to L-methionine. So D-methionine can be utilized in the body after they've been converted to L-methionine, right? Except for human. Threonine, D-threonine is poorly utilized by animal species. Phenylalanine, depending on animal species and so on. The question mark here is no research done. So if you want to do research in this area, I mean, that can be you can contribute to the basic science. You can answer these questions here. So depending on amino acid, depending on animal species, the ability of the animal utilizing D-type amino acids are greatly different. How about ruminant animal, ruminants? It will be different. Why? For the ruminant animals, before these amino acids reach to the real gastrointestinal tract, which is small intestine, important parts, everything will be altered, modified in the rumen and reticulum. So bacteria, rumen bacteria will modify the amino acids. Right? So their ability will be largely influenced by the ability by the rumen bacteria. Okay? The next is solubility. The solubility of protein will determine the characteristics of protein. That'll be one of the main characteristics of protein. Depending on the source of protein, solubility is largely different. Okay? In the case of casein, as an example, casein is a milk protein. The casein is known to be highly soluble. Here, when I say soluble, solubility very often equals to digestibility. Soluble protein is highly digestible. Insoluble protein is poorly digestible. Because protein should be soluble so that the enzymes, the digestive enzyme can act on, right? Requires water, right? Okay, casein is very soluble. Why? Because if you look at the three-dimensional structure of casein made of a sequence of amino acids, there are more hydrophilic amino acids found on the surface of this 3D structure of the casein. Compared to blood meal, known to be highly insoluble, you can find more hydrophobic amino acid on the surface. So which protein source you want to use feeding animals, or what protein source you want to eat? Okay? If you eat a highly soluble proteins, you will have a high digestibility of that protein. The animals can digest the protein better and grow better. Okay? But there is an exceptional application, interesting application. What if I feed a casein to cattle? Highly soluble. Don't do that because why? All the casein will be gone in the rumen. It will not reach it will not reach the abomasum or small intestine. The animals cannot utilize. Only the rumen bacteria will eat that all already. So highly soluble means highly digestible, fermentable. So rumen microorganism will take care of it. You're gone. So if you want to deliver some protein successfully to the abomasum and small intestine of the ruminants, you have to bypass, you have to allow the protein to pass the rumen and reticulum. So it is the concept called rumen bypass. How do? You can use insoluble protein, which equal to poorly fermentable. There's a higher chance that this insoluble protein will pass the rumen and reticulum and deliver to the stomach. Hopefully, the acid in the stomach can handle the insolubility to becomes making it little soluble, and some of them can be digested and utilized in the small intestine. Okay? Better than being all utilized and gone in the rumen. So those are bypass protein. The concept of bypass protein. The popular bypass protein includes blood meal, corn gluten meal, feather meal. Those are resistant to microbial fermentation in the rumen and reticulum, which also means insoluble. Okay? Soybean meal, protein in soybean meal is relatively soluble, but if you heat soybean meal, so heat damaged soybean meal becomes relatively insoluble, so you can increase the percent of bypass. So heat damage or heat processed soybean meal can be used as a rumen bypass protein as well, right? So that's some exceptional application utilizing the characteristics of protein related to solubility. So I mentioned about 4 different characteristics of protein. Quantity or quality, racemization, racemation, and solubility. I'd like to close this first week by listing more specific functions of protein, more than general functions, more specific functions. Protein, the enzyme is very important catalyst, helping all the metabolic process, biochemical process in the body. All the enzymes are protein, so one of important function of protein is as enzymes. Right? And some proteins are used to transport the nutrients called transport protein. Right? If I show you the examples here, albumin and hemoglobin, that's a good example of proteins transporting other nutrients. Albumin, as an example, it will transfer fatty acid in the blood. In a hemoglobin, as an example, it will transfer the oxygen in the body through the blood circulation. And there's a protein function in storing the nutrient. Example is specific protein called ferritin. This is protein which will bind to iron and store the iron in the body. The types of protein have key function in maintaining the structure of the body or tissue. The examples are collagens and keratins. You find collagens on the skin and keratins in connective tissues and joints and so on. And we have proteins with main functions in muscle contraction. The specific types of protein is called actin and myosin. Okay? So depending on types of protein, there are so diverse functions in the body. There are types of protein called immunoglobulin. It has very important role in body immune function, defending the body from the invasion from the outside. There are different types of immunoglobulins, type G, type A, or even a type M found in milk. Okay? And there are types of proteins, functions in function in the in regulating the body processes, metabolism, right, as a hormone. But not all the hormones are proteins, because some hormones are lipids. So those hormones made of protein is, we specifically call them peptide hormone. Maybe you heard about this hormone, very famous hormone called insulin. Insulin is made of amino acids, so it's protein, it's peptide hormone as an example. Okay? So these are more specific functions of proteins, basically different types of proteins. Right? I think that this is enough for today, providing the basis about introduction of the protein. Okay? From next week, we will be talking about how proteins from the food and feeds are digested after ingestion. Okay? So I'll see you next week. Before that, I'll stop sharing. Okay, so have a good day and see you next week.